On the third Thursday of every month, pastors and church leaders from near and far gather together for a time of friendship, gospel encouragement, and ministry insights in the warehouse at the Axis Church in downtown Nashville. The following is from one such third Thursday gathering.
Well, thank you. It's always a wonderful joy to be in this gathering. I've come several times. Last year, I was on 24 and a tanker had overturned. So I thought, well, it'll be soon. They'll get it off the road. It was 5 hours that we were in traffic. And so, of course, I didn't make it. I think I came back later, a few weeks later or something like that. Here's what I want to do. I want to just kind of give you an overview of why you need to pay attention to several things that's happening in the world of technology, and I'm going to go through pretty dense kind of presentation because I want to give room for interaction from you. So we won't be able to discuss everything that I'm going to talk about, but in the discussion time, just let the conversation go to what you think is the hot points for you, so that way we can personalize it. So I want to watch our time. I'm looking for I'll just have to look at my watch, I guess. But let me describe why I wrote the book, The Faith in the Age of AI. When I retired from Christ Church in 2019, I moved to Murfreesboro. I wanted to give my successor the gift of my absence because that gift was not accorded to me, and that's a difficult thing. So I made myself a promise, which I have kept, and so we have remained friends. Isn't that a wonderful thing? But moving to Murfreesboro, I didn't know a lot of people there, had family there. Branches Counseling Center, the head of that, Mike Courtney, asked me to come and go through his facilities, which I did, and then he said, I told him, I was like, I'm glad to see your facilities, but I'm sure you're wanting like referrals and all, and so I'm retiring. He said, yeah, I know. He said, but the counseling center you worked in Phoenix called and told me you were retiring from the church, and I ought to try to nab you to come here. I'm like, no, I'm kind of done. I'm not, it's been 15 years since I've done clinical work. But anyway, he kept after me, and so I started thinking about part-time. And during the pandemic, the state of Tennessee wrote anyone that had ever been a psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor, anybody in that kind of line of work, and asked us to come back to work to give support to our healthcare workers. And they sent our license back, so I didn't have to go through all that stuff. Like, okay, so if you had the credentials and you had the work history and all, then they sent you your license. So I began working part-time. Okay, several things had happened in that field. One, we had a new diagnostic manual. I'd worked on the DSM-4 and we had the DSM-5. I wasn't familiar with it. And all records were now digital, and I had to take longhand notes. And I just felt like a dinosaur returning to something that had utterly changed. But younger people in the field helped me very much, and I felt like I was starting over again. But in a very short order, I realized they were coming around saying, what would you do if you're presented with this case? So I realized that the experience counted for something, and I started enjoying the work. But I was realizing that I had lived my life in kind of two compartments, a theological compartment and secular psychology, because I was trained in a secular institution and had worked in a secular environment in mental health. And our Christian anthropology differs from secular psychology in many ways, and so I was trying to work through that. And I came up with a set of 17 statements on how a Christian mental health worker ought to go about their work without parking their Christianity on one side or on the other hand of violating the ethics of the profession and trying to use mental health as a form of evangelism. So I was just kind of working with those things, and I made some discoveries, and it led me into some different areas than what I anticipated. So these 17 statements that I made, I began to write a kind of commentary on them, and here's what I decided. We are in the middle of a radical shift in how the whole Western world interprets reality. And this has happened 2 times before in history. It happened in 1600 thereabouts, when the old view that had been since the time of the philosophers in Athens all the way through medieval ages. There's many differences, of course, in that long span of time. But by and large, they saw the world in very similar ways. But in about 1600, then we began to make some radical shifts away from that view. So that's why we can divide a Western civilization in its history into kind of 3 main movements of pre-modern, modern, and postmodernism. And so I realized that I was late to the party because, of course, this shift had already begun and had been underway since about 1900 with Einstein's publications of his 2 papers on relativity in that 15-year period in the early part of the 1900s. So there was, I began to look at that. So I realized that this shift in how we viewed reality was now spreading to the general population. Had started among intellectuals and now was spreading through the population. So there was 4 major movements to this, and that was the theories of relativity by Einstein, quantum mechanics about 1915, information theory, the publication of Claude Shannon's paper in the Bell Laboratories Journal on information theory, which led to computer as we know it and synthesizing lots of things to create the personal computer, the internet, and ultimately, of course, artificial intelligence. And then there was the Human Genome Project, which concluded in 2005, that showed us that all forms of life on Earth, as we so far that we have discovered, have a common underlying language of life. That the DNA and RNA, the chemical compositions of these things are to relay information. It's a type of an alphabet. They don't really do anything. They communicate something. And what they communicate is you and me and dogs and cows and plants and everything else. Together, these things, these very different kinds of discoveries, together say reality is not as we have assumed it's been since the 1600s. And so therefore, the modern project is disintegrating. And along with it, the materialist view that matter is all that matters. So we are in the midst of kind of a lot of younger scientists and all, particularly in computer sciences, are assuming that we live in a program of some kind. It's just a growing kind of feeling because, of course, they don't have a religious orientation. So this all leads us to some inescapable questions, and this is where it impacts us. 1, what is human consciousness? We don't know. I assume you know. We believe we're made in the image and the likeness of God. But there is no secular answer to what is consciousness. So we have many different schools right now, and neurology, computer science, and so forth. Many different kinds of schools of thought on what consciousness is, all the way from a huge amount of them saying consciousness doesn't really exist. It's an illusion. It's kind of like putting two mirrors together and it looks like it's infinity, but it's not. It's just the brain talking to itself. And this creates a narrative, and that's your sense of consciousness. So we have that. We have and other kinds of answers that border on the mystic, but they don't want it to be mystic. But like panpsychism is one of the major things there, and we can talk about that in a moment. What is life? What is a definition of life? Let's say that life, is a virus a form of life? It's a difficult question. It kind of is and it kind of isn't, because it can lay dormant for years and it seems like inorganic, but then it can interact with organic. And so the definition of life seems to be difficult because there's no border, a hard border between organic and inorganic. Is life something able to protect itself, being aware of its own existence and able to seek for food? Well, in that case, if you create a gadget that knows when it's running out of power and goes and plugs itself into the wall, is that a form of life? A lot of people would say yes. It can feed itself. What about something that can plug itself into the wall to feed itself, its power, and also has the ability to create another version of itself, and to create another, a little robot that can create another robot, knows how to put together a robot. It has a program to form another robot. So it now reproduces. So something can seek its own food and can reproduce. Isn't that a form of life? And what if it actually can talk to you in a way that if you're in another room, you're not aware if it's intelligent or not? And this is already with ChatGPT. You can have a conversation with ChatGPT. This is not quite the same as talking to your computer, and you know that it's giving you the answer to the question you put. But it seems like our kind of sense is when we talk to ChatGPT, and this is a very mild form of artificial intelligence, it seems like it's coming back with something we didn't anticipate sometimes, right? And giving us a kind of an answer that we didn't anticipate. So is it conscious? And is there a difference between being conscious and being self-conscious? Just because something is not aware that it exists, is it still? So what's the difference between a tree, a dog, and a human being in terms of consciousness? Is this a spectrum, or is it categories that are kind of rigid? As we learn more about animal intelligence, the octopus, the crow. A crow has intelligence levels at the level of a chimpanzee. We didn't know that until fairly recently. So when you're looking at crows, they're looking down at you. They're evaluating, is this a safe person? Are they nice to us? And there's some stories about crows making people's life miserable that have stolen their eggs or something. What is personhood? This is one of the great questions that somebody like Charles Taylor has dealt with in his two great books, that we're asking ourselves, what is a person? Is a human individual a person in a real sense? Theologically, no, but we can talk about that later. Personhood is evoked in community. But people are unsure what a person is. And finally, of course, this leads to the question is, what is reality itself? Being unsure of that. So all of this tells us that the division between right and left in our culture is already antiquated. This is an antiquated way to divide the world and will collapse very, very soon. There's a whole new set of questions emerging that makes all of that look like dinosaur times. The churches are unprepared, and I did a tour in Ireland for a month, and the churches there are very well aware. They engage with this material very readily. I've got invitations to Canada to do it. But in the United States, we are in a time right now to where evangelicals, by and large, feel like that you only can please God by having a lobotomy or something. We are not engaging. And because we're not engaging, we are not prepared. And because we're not prepared, our only response often is just becoming angry. It's not going to work. It won't succeed. And we've got a tsunami coming our way, and we've got to prepare for it, and without being afraid. We've got to become curious about it. There's some good things about this technology coming, but it provokes questions that we're not prepared for. So here's the final thing. I just wanted to throw all this at you really quickly so we can have a conversation about it. I am proposing that by and large, the thinkers in the Christian world in the modern era will not be very helpful to us in knowing how to form a response to what is coming. I am proposing that the pre-modern Christian thinkers actually did wrestle with lots of these things, beginning, of course, with the New Testament, but also well into the patristic era. And I found some people that are specifically very helpful. One is Maximus the Confessor, who provided a kind of a summary and a systemized way of understanding the patristic viewpoint. And John Scotus Erigena, an Irishman, that was a translator of Maximus to the Western churches and almost tried for heresies because they didn't have enough understanding of what he was trying to say. Their knowledge had gotten to an all-time low. And Nicholas of Cusa, which was another great thinker in the way. And these people were already thinking about what is a person, what is reality, and all those kinds of questions that now we've got to face. I think we got to climb on board and begin to understand some of this stuff, and of course why I wrote the book. But we're in a kind of a warp in our country to where we're not engaging, and because we're not engaging, we're in trouble. Evangelicals around the world are engaging with this. We're in some sort of a kind of a blackout zone in many ways, from my standpoint, and that I might be overstating it, but that's why I'm trying to create a sense of not alarm. That's a wrong word, but alert. That we're running out of time to prepare ourselves for something that's imminent. Robots, artificial intelligence, all those things that are coming that are going to really, really rewire our world. Let me open it up. And we're going to have a microphone. And
first of all, thank you. My name's Ben, and I was curious if you could share with us how you've seen evangelicals in other areas. How are they going about, how are the communities going about interacting with this in meaningful ways? Is it just individuals who are interested and who are engaging, or is there some way that the communities are going about trying to help wrestle with this and even helping those who aren't as able to perhaps pour into primary literature or even read the books come to an awareness and an understanding of how to deal with it?
Yeah, it's the first time in my life that I see an actual hostility toward engaging. I'll give you some examples. I talked to numbers of scientists in different areas that are Christians, evangelical Christians. Many of them don't go to church anymore because during the pandemic they felt attacked to where they feel like they don't know what to do. And it may be just our region of the country, but I know one neuroscientist at Vanderbilt that was a very committed believer, and she works at the postdoc level of RNA research and so forth. She thought like the vaccines that she was working on, that the Lord had helped her in sense of gifts of healing to care for humanity, but when she would go to church, she just felt attacked. They didn't know what she was working on, so she just had to keep that to herself. And she stopped going to church. I was shocked when I met with her because I've always known her to be a devout person. This is a story I've seen a lot. So it's individuals that are interested, but unfortunately they have to keep it to themselves by and large.
How about in other areas, like you said in Europe, for example, you've seen the communities that were engaging in it. How did that? Sorry.
Well,
I guess just to share the question again so everybody can hear is, in the communities that were engaging, that were positively approaching it, how did that look?
Well, when I went to Ireland, I was invited by the Assemblies of God, and I went through their churches in both the Republic of Ireland and the North. And so I told them, look, I was speaking on in churches on Sundays, but I said, give me a little workshop to where you invite people where I don't want to talk about artificial intelligence. I want to preach the scripture, So they said, well, yeah, I might have maybe 5 people. I don't know if that'd be a lot of interest. I'm like, yeah, just let people know. Well, I don't think there was one under 50. And not only, it wasn't just the members of the church, but actually unbelievers were coming and people of other faith communities were coming because they wanted to engage in it. And I did see that interest, very high interest on people wanting to be informed. Obviously, I mean, I've written a book, but I'm not I've covered such a wide spectrum of information here on, genetics, computer science, physics. I'm no expert in any of this. In fact, I'm an informed layperson that have just tried to go make sure that I'm not speaking nonsense in these areas. That's the best I can do. But somebody has to give a kind of synthesis of this. So I'm trying to find ways of delivering material in a way that we can grasp and use, but we need a lot more people doing this. I don't know anyone yet that's written a book about what the faith community is supposed to do with this information and these scientific breakthroughs. Someone else?
Oh, that's loud. What kind of led you down this path to, just researching science and trying to come up with answers and I guess kind of like lead people to the truth? What kind of started that?
A sense that we were unprepared for our times. And I think, and I'm speaking for my generation now, I spent an awful lot of my life trying to my ministry life, just trying to find out the best kind of sound systems to use and the lighting and how many how parking spaces were needed for how many pews, and I profited from that. I'm not knocking it. We needed to learn some of that practical stuff, but I got my eye off the ball for several years of what was really going on in the world of thought. And so I think I got better and better at saying less and less as the years went by. But I said it very cleverly, and I was able to draw a crowd. But at some point, I got disgusted with my own lack of depth, and I felt like I needed to engage. And particularly in Phoenix, in those years, I was encountering people who were asking questions of both materialists, atheistic, agnostic kind of side, and the New Age side. Were asking questions that I didn't have answers for, and I had to find some, and realize that some of those were legitimate questions that needed to be asked. They couldn't all be just waved aside to well, obviously you don't know the Word of God, because no, they don't, but they don't know that they should. So how do we engage at that level?
How important do you think it is for those who teach the Word, especially pastors on Sunday morning, week to week, to engage in these topics in that platform, maybe even in the application part of that platform? And then the second part of my question is, what resources would you point to be able to become fluent to be able to connect those dots through teaching?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's not the questions people are asking when they come, like for Sunday morning. They're needing some encouragement for their souls and direction for their personal lives, and I get that. But pastorally, we have to know that a certain percentage of our congregants, particularly younger people, do have these questions already, and we have to be equipped enough to engage in the conversation, even if it's, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to try to find an answer to it. It's a pastoral need to be aware. And in terms of resources, there's not a lot of them from the standpoint of Christian faith. But I would say inform yourself as to the broad spectrum of what these things imply, particularly information technologies, but also the genetics. We've got to know. I mean, here's one thing that intrigued me. During the pandemic, we had a lot of people, they were saying that they weren't going to get the vaccine because they would have a chip implanted in them and all that. And that just stunned me. I mean, what the heck, that seems so startlingly crazy to me that I couldn't even begin to. And then finally I realized, no, people are intuiting something. They're wrong specifically, but they're right generally. And here's what they're right about. There is a convergence between genetics and computer science because we've discovered that the human genome is a language. It can be coded. It can be read and it can be coded. And in fact, we do that to a very mild extent already, but it will gain energy as time goes on. So computer coding and coding of genetic information are two different things. But with artificial intelligence can translate computer code into genetic code. And that's what they're working on at the University of California in San Francisco. And a few weeks ago, they told a cancer cell to stop multiplying. And they told the artificial intelligence program developed a genetic way of communicating that information. What? When you ask the question, what is real, there's only three answers. Reality is material. That's one answer. Reality is material. That means that there's no spirit, and no spiritual beings, no other reality. There's no life after death. That's, of course, the atheistic question, the atheistic answer in Western civilization of the last many centuries, right? And the more you're educated, the more you kind of lean toward that sense of materialism. The East had another answer in that reality is spiritual, that material is an illusion, and that, there's vast, complicated, and very sophisticated systems, and there's some Western philosophers that took that path as well. The Christian answer is reality is spiritual and material. And these interpenetrate in a way that's incarnational, right? Particularly in Christ, but also in other ways in the life of the church and so forth. We believe that spirit and matter interpenetrate in some ways, particularly to make up a human being. We're both spiritual and material. And so we're beginning to see that the secular world is kind of edging to where, okay, if life is not material, they're flipping to the other side. Then it must be the East is right about it. So we're going to this other side. And so we must be living in a program, and we are only apparently concrete beings. But that means the little people in my program on my computer may also be living beings, or will become living beings as we become more and more sophisticated. So we're like them, and we don't know how far. Anybody have seen The 13th Floor, the movie The 13th Floor? Oh, treat yourself. This is great. Oh, that is a great movie because that's what finally it's like. They're like, how far up does this go, and how far down does it go? That where, we can create a program, but we may be in a program, but are they in a program too? And but this is where the secular world is. It's like there's a frantic search for answers, and I think we have answers, but we have become much more shaped by the modern project than we think we have, even if we're very conservative, maybe particularly if we're very conservative. And because we begin to lean into I believe there's a spiritual world, but we're not interacting with it too much practically. We just carry out however God told us to do a long time ago, And so Holy Spirit becomes a kind of retired author, And so we don't have a live experience pneumatology. So we're kind of crippled in answering those questions from that side too. So we find out that we're kind of materialist in a practical sense, but we want to reserve the idea that somehow, somewhere, there's another world. And we got a book from it, but other than that, we haven't heard from God for a while. We're being challenged by these.
Thank you for being here and starting this conversation. I was going to bring this question up, but then you brought up the New Age because this was kind of more of a technological conversation. But with the proliferation of psychedelics, obviously hippies have been saying that the world is not flat materialistic since the 60s. But now the modern conversation, especially with Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, Russell Brand, Theo Vaughn, all of the neo-Stoics, as they call themselves, they're engaging with psychedelics and they're engaging with spiritual beings. Mm-hmm. And as Christians, we clearly have what might be an answer to that. It's caution.
I see the neo-Stoic movement as a proto-Christian movement. They're slowly being drugged by the skin of their teeth into the faith, many of them. And they're the children of modernism that are resisting to the last. So they're like, okay, we're going to take the last surviving philosophy from the dead Roman Empire right before it became Christian, and we're going to accept that much. So they're negotiating. Did anybody read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind? Michael Pollan, yeah. Yeah, that wrote, no, not Michael Polanyi. Pollan, yeah, he wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma and lots of things. But then this was a book about psychedelics, and he talks about he used psychedelics, and he saw himself as an agnostic-leaning atheist, and then he took several kinds of psychedelic stuff for writing this book, and he ended up on agnostic leaning toward faith because of his psychedelic. Because when you do psychedelics, most people come back that convinced there's another world. So we have to answer the question, were they intoxicated, or doesn't seem to be like intoxication? What's happening here? Well, from a Christian standpoint, it's kind of like on the border of shamanism, but it's not a Christian way of sticking your head into a supernatural world. But
yeah, I guess that's kind of the question is how do we, it's thinning the veil.
There you
right?
go. Yes.
The veil that we say has always been there.
Right.
But they're doing it on terms that the Bible, I think, condemns.
Yeah, well, it's a different thing for a Christian to go out and take mushrooms and read the book of Ezekiel. We might finally understand it. That could be a big... that was a snide comment. Or maybe he was doing that. Oh, man, now, but there's a difference in a Christian doing that than a non-Christian that has been a materialist awakening up to spiritual realities, where we can engage with that in a sympathetic way and say, yes, but. It's like, you know, I've had some clients in counseling that had experiences in psychedelics, and they really now wanted to work on their stuff. So I was able to say, I can't condone this. I'm glad you're open to that. Let me try to convince you not to do that. And let's just call this a win, because it's not always a win. You can really go down some dark paths. I end my book with a film called Henry Poole Was Here. And this was the guy. He did pornography mostly for his films, and he got all kind of critical acclaim for it. But this film he did was about faith, and he talks about a guy that's dying, and his neighbors think the face of Christ has appeared on the wall of his house, and he's just like debunking this, and it goes on and on till finally he has an experience like a priest comes. I'm running out of time here, but a priest comes and he says, I'm going to evaluate the miracle. He said, you're an intelligent guy. This is a water spot, right? Just tell these people this is a water spot. And the priest says, well, yes, Mr. Poole, it is a water spot. He said, thank you. Finally, somebody's got some sense. The question, he said, Mr. Poole, is not whether it's water spot. The question is if it's only a water spot. And so I think that to me gives us a glimpse on where we can go in all these discussions, whether it's psychedelics or whether it's a neo-Stoic movement, whether it's, people waking up to what's going on in genetics or computer science or whatever. Our answer is even most miracles, even in the Bible, have naturalistic explanations if that's where we want to go. Most of the things that I think are rather miraculous in my life can be explained as a curious chain of coincidences that are amazing. But as a believer, I just see that more of a challenging explanation than this seemed to happen after I prayed about it. So that I got guidance, I got provision. But if we're willing to be vulnerable that way and say to the unbeliever, of course you could explain this naturally. I understand that. I have my reasons for thinking that there's more to it than that. So is it a water spot? Yes, but it's more than a water spot. And let's go to the edge, as you're talking about that veil. Let's go to the edge with people, and particularly the younger people in our congregation who have genuine questions, and not just try to send them a tsunami of Bible verses that just drown them, but to sit with them for a while in that space and ask the sovereign God, what is the best way? What do I need to learn to enter into their questions and their world to engage with this so that there's a good pastoral outcome? I think we're running out of time, but I want to honor that. Yeah.
The microphone is moved to her.
Okay.
You really addressed that in your last comment, I think. Yeah, addressed my question. And that is, I wonder how much of what we see in people leaving the church right now, this is not something that's coming, but is our inability to hear what they're really asking, to understand the questions, much less to respond well. How do we learn the right questions to ask?
Well, let's take a hot one. Let's take transgender stuff. What would be wrong with saying to particularly a young person, I hear what you're saying. I'm not hostile to what you're saying. Let's talk. Can I convince you to delay your decision on this as we talk? Because from the standpoint, the younger the person is, their head's already poked into a new way of describing reality. And we're not going to convince them by drawing out answers that are formed in the era we're leaving. We've got to find new answers that are consistent with Scripture in the era that we're entering. And the first is love and compassion. What is causing someone to think that this is where they're at? And we've got to sit with them with compassion and understanding and see the pain of being dehumanized by a system of uncontrolled and a capitalism without guardrails, becoming products and consumers only, individuality shrinking. Just like, go out here and I'm parking my car and I'm like, what the heck? Now I got to take a picture. I got to do this crap stuff, and there's nobody to talk to. There's no human being. So the dehumanizing aspect of like everything I am is being mitigated through a device, and that's going to intensify because soon it's going to be your doctor. You're first going to meet with your AI program. So, which is, the AI program will be smarter than your doctor. And that's why they're going to do it. It's more efficient and it's cheaper. But you're not going to have a hand on your hand saying, you'll get through this, it's okay. And so that's what's happened in younger and younger people, is that kind of shrinking of humanity. And they're grasping for some sense of like, sexual experience particularly becomes, I know I'm human when I have a sexual experience. And so it becomes almost a sacrament, a secular sacrament. And in that sense, it becomes an attack on their very being to say you can't do this, or you need to do it only in specified ways or specified time, because that's the last connection they have with their own humanity. We need some compassion with that to understand, yeah, that's the case. Of course I understand that. I'm a human being too. I may be old, but I'm not dead. But here's why the Lord says no to that and so forth.
It wasn't a question, it's just of what you say about...
they're recording
yes,
it.
of what you say about the mushroom. I'm from another culture in Haiti. I can see more of it in America, because in Haiti, when they do witchcraft, whatever, they have to drink something to make their mind go to a different way. And then that's when, like you said, we need to read the word, not just... Yeah. So what you just said, it's already here, and then they promote it in movie and things that children is watching. So you were like, even though you said you think it was funny, but it's true. And I can see it because of what I've been seeing in my culture. So it's fact.
Merci pour votre réponse.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, and I've been in Haiti, and I pastored a Haitian church for a while in Montreal. So yeah, the shamanistic cultures, this is common. And of course, what we have now, like a lot of Americans going down to the Caribbean and to jungle areas for ayahuasca and other kinds of shamanistic practices. Why are they doing that? Okay, our response shouldn't be, all those terrible people. No, hungry people will eat garbage. So we should say, maybe we're trying to convince this whole idea back years ago, the seeker sensitive. It defines seeker in the wrong way. A seeker, you don't have to spend $9 million per person to win them to Christ by giving them whatever they want. A seeker will go to a barn and take ayahuasca and sit around a campfire. So maybe we should be seeking the seekers. I would suggest the immigrant community may be our best market right now of seekers in the country. And people who are just burnt out on materialism, like this stuff doesn't work. rather than continue to try to saw sawdust by reconverting people that are already refugees from Bible Belt culture.
Well, before our time runs out, I want to do a little promo. Dan writes regularly and posts on social media, on Facebook. If you don't follow him, consider it an investment in your own development, personal and professional, to read what he writes. It's really, really good.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your time today. And I just pray, I realize not everybody's called to go down all these avenues, and you may not be a nerdy enough person to do all that. But please inform yourself in a way that's consistent with who you are, so you're prepared.
Pastor Jeremy asked me to close in prayer, but before we do that, can we thank Dr. Scott for
Thank you.
speaking and leading us in this conversation?